But first, I promise you this will be the last of my shows in which you'll hear the name Djokovic. It's been 12 endless days we'll never get back. However, let's not pretend that this bloke wasn't gaming our system. He definitely was. He ignored Victorian government directives that without a vaccination, he wouldn't be allowed to play or arrive in Victoria. How many times did Dan express that view? He applied for a visa which doesn't enable an exemption. There are still cyber experts here and abroad convinced he tested positive not on December 16, but December 26, which would have prevented his arrival as well. He lied about where he'd travelled to in the weeks before arriving in Melbourne. That alone should have been enough to have him sent home. The word cheat comes to mind, even given what we can prove from that list. And bear in mind, as a foreigner, you can't play in the US Open or the French Open unless you're doubly vaccinated. And so I'm extremely glad Djokovic was deported last night for all the reasons not used in yesterday's bizarre sitting of the full bench of the Federal Circuit Court. None of those facts were relied on by the Immigration Minister, Alex Hawke, to win yesterday's case. And for all of us sitting on the outside of the legal fraternity, it seemed wrong to not bombard the court with the list of discrepancies we'd found, including the key argument, if you're not vaccinated, he can't enter Australia, Your Honours. And yet today, the Prime Minister tried to explain that he was sent packing because he wasn't vaccinated.
Federal government gave him no such exemption. If you come in from overseas and you have a visa, whatever that visa is, you either have to be vaccinated or you have to have a valid medical exemption and show evidence of it. And those things weren't achieved. So they're the rules.
Now, technically, what the Prime Minister is saying on two fronts there is wrong. None of those arguments from the PM were used by his minister yesterday to win that case. In fact, through his lawyer, Alex Hawke conceded in submissions that Djokovic did indeed have a viable exemption. He did accept that the argument put by Djokovic's team that he did was reasonable. So the Prime Minister's wrong. Litigation lawyer Justin Quill made that point on Sky News earlier today.
We invited him here. We told him he had an exemption. We gave him a visa.
What the government used before the three judges was that to allow Djokovic to remain in Australia and play in the Australian Open would lead to more anti-vaccination protests and rallies. That Djokovic has a well-known scepticism of COVID-19 vaccination and his presence in Australia was a risk to public health because he had become, rightly or wrongly, an icon for anti-vaccination groups. Now, I would have thought that is a terribly weak argument. And I would have thought it leaves behind and ignores the central tenet in this entire case, that he wasn't vaccinated. He was told he needed to be vaccinated to come to Australia. And so all the court was duty-bound to do, even though the case was weak, was to rule on the lawlessness of the decision. That is, was it a decision that the minister can make? They weren't deciding on the merits or wisdom of that decision. In many ways, it was sheer legal genius. They chose the weakest argument, the smallest target, and it's allowed the government to maintain its border security status and win over the 71% of Australians found in yesterday's Nine newspaper poll to support a decision to deport the world's #1 tennis star. Now, as for the opposition, they've been hounding the government over those last 12 days endlessly for creating this drama in the first case. Today, Labor Senator Christina Keneally was using her best angry voice to bash the Morrison government for giving Djokovic a visa in the first place and for not pulling him up in Dubai.
The Morrison government gave Novak Djokovic a visa 60 days ago. They didn't do anything when Novak Djokovic tweeted he was coming to Australia. They didn't do anything when he got on a plane to come here, including in Dubai, where we have ABF officers who could have sorted this out.
Wrong. Wrong. You've got to admire her tenacity, I think, but she's all wrong. Visas are automatically, electronically issued through an online process without any visitation to a consulate or embassy. It doesn't work in the fashion that we might think. They don't sit down and get interviewed to work out whether they've got all the paperwork. It's up to a traveller who will risk deportation and the cost of their return flights if they choose to not provide the proper vaccination or exemption paperwork when they arrive in Australian Customs Hall. That's how it works. It's dead easy. And two, Australian Border Force officials or ADF officials, Australian Federal Police officials, don't work in Customs Hall at Dubai. There are a couple of Border Force liaison officers in the General Airport, but they don't have jurisdiction over what is not Australian territory. In fact, neither do any Border Force staff from any other country, Christina Keneally. Maybe the Senator should use Alex Hawke's lawyers in future.